All right, this is part two CPR. I'm only doing cardio questions and SNL questions. Okay. Before I start again, I gotta set my timer first. Give a couple of announcements. One, if you go onto my YouTube channel, if you go under playlists, you will be able to see all the different playlists I make. They go over basically they're multi-part series, each one of them, and they do like a question bank for a specific term. That's announcement number one. Announcement number two, I'll have my Instagram or maybe an email or some way of you communicating with me in the comments and description. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. If you have any concerns, if you want to know my opinion on something, feel free to contact me there. It's going to take me like a week or whatever to answer, but I'll get to it eventually. Perfect. Let's get started. So, part one, we only did four questions. I'm going to try to get a little faster, but the reason we did four questions is because I explained a lot of concepts underneath, right? Okay. So, question number five, it says uh, drug X causes a 50 millimeter rise in blood pressure, in mean blood pressure, uh, and but it doesn't cause any blood pressure when there's a ganglion blocker, right? Okay. And even a higher raise in blood pressure when there's atropine pre-treatment, right? Okay. So ganglion blockers, they block the ganglion. And that basically means there is no sympathetic or parasympathetic activity. Now, the fact that ganglion blockers have eliminated the effect of these drugs, it means uh, the drug takes effect on. First of all, like let's talk about what increases blood pressure here, what decreases blood pressure. All these guys increase blood pressure, right? So out of our choices, acetylcholine doesn't really increase blood pressure, right? Acetylcholine. Okay. Uh, atropine. Atropine doesn't really also. I'm thinking. Well, atropine does increase blood pressure because it eliminates muscarinic signaling, and that increases blood pressure. But epinephrine increases blood pressure. But remember, epinephrine has direct alpha one and beta one and beta two activity, right? So I don't see all of these work directly with the cells of their target themselves. They don't go through a ganglia, so I don't see why a ganglia blocker would affect any of that, right? So atropine isn't our answer either. We got hexamethonium and nicotine, right? Now nicotine itself is a ganglion blocker. It doesn't blocks our ganglia, right? So let's think about what's left. Why would hmm I'm leaning more towards hexamethonium. Uh, and the reason for that is I know hexamethonium is like a ganglion. I think it's a nicotinic, uh, like a neuronal nicotinic receptor agonist, right? And if we have, if we have, hmm, if you have ganglion blockage, it's going to stop working. That's the only thing that is immediately obvious to me. Now, I don't really like this question, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I don't think it's a good question, but I think I'm going to go with, well, it's nicotine. Let me pause this, think, and get back to it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it here. All right. Hope the recording is back. Basically, I don't like this question, but I'm going to explain what's going on. Atropine is a muscarinic agonist, right? So it blocks the M receptors. Where are the M receptors? Here, I drew this. So this is a parasympathetic ganglia. This is sympathetic ganglia. They both receive, these are receptors. These are nicotinic receptors. Remember, nicotinic receptors bind to acetylcholine too, right? But atropine doesn't work on these. Atropine only works on the acetylcholine receptors that are found on the M1, M2s, right? It's a muscarinic, as atropine is a muscarinic agonist, right? Uh, M1, 3, right? So atropine, if you give it to a patient, right, it's gonna block this. So it's gonna block some of the parasympathetic. So you'll get a little bit of increase in heart rate, but there is no reason to think that first of all, you wouldn't get an increase with if the patient is already atropine pre-treated, right? That wouldn't make sense, or if the ganglion is blocked, right? Now, hexamethonium is a ganglion blocker. Basically, it comes here, it blocks these two receptors, and it leads the heart or whatever organ to have a tone opposite to what it would usually have, right? So the way this concept works in general is that when you have something like nicotine, nicotine binds to both of these, right? Nicotine, I mean, it's called a nicotinic receptor for a reason. It stimulates both of these, right? So it puts these two against each other, right? For some organs, some systems, parasympathetic is dominant. For some, is sympathetic dominant. From what I remember, the vasculature and the heart are sympathetic dominant, right? Uh, so when we give nicotine by itself, it will increase the blood pressure. Now, if we have something like a ganglion blocker, obviously nothing's going to happen, right? Because it's blocking where nicotine works. If you give atropine, atropine is going to block this this side of the equation, and we're only going to get stimulation through this side. So atropine by itself, atropine plus or nicotine is responsible for this 75 millimeter, right? So that's nicotine. One thing I want to say here, this concept has come up in term one. It has come up in, as you can see, in term four. But the concept of what's dominant and what's not, I've never seen it come up in like something like AMBOSS, right? Even a drug like hexamethonium is not even in AMBOSS's search bar. So, and AMBOSS's search bar has everything. So, take this with a grain of salt. Uh, SU puts a lot of emphasis on this concept. I've just never seen it come up anywhere else. Maybe I haven't seen enough multiple choice questions, but to my experience, it hasn't come up a lot. Still know it well because you don't want to get 3, 4 questions wrong because of something like this on your exam. Okay. Question 6 is a 38-year-old farmer. By the way, please like this video. It will help me a lot. It helps with the YouTube algorithm and all that jazz. Uh, 38-year-old farmer. It's been working. Suddenly, he starts feeling hot, flushed, present with mydriasis, xeroxismia, I forgot what it was, and disorientation, right? So, hot, flushed, it's like vasodilation, right? Mydriasis, the way I think of it, mydriasis as a D is dilation, dilate. When do you dilate? Her, uh, and heart rate is elevated, right? What drug do you give to treat this patient? I mean, this question you've seen it a million times, but I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So you got mydriasis, which means your pupils are dilated. When do your pupils get dilated is when you have more sympathetic stimulation or less parasympathetic. Okay, this is a weird question, actually. Okay, so dilate, think of it like, I don't know, like a cat or like a prey animal. When it gets anxious or whatever, it needs to open up its eyes to get more photons in to see better. When it's in a parasympathetic state, when it's relaxing, it can constrict its pupils, right, to get less photons in. So this guy's pupils are dilated. See, that changes the fate of the question. Uh, if it's dilated, it means you either have high sympathetic or low parasympathetic. Okay, so usually when these guys come, the question like this, you gotta think of, okay, this guy used like a herbicide or whatever insecticide that will block acetylcholine esterase. Therefore, it will increase acid. We have increased acetylcholine. Therefore, we have high parasympathetic. But this question is giving you the opposite. So in this case, if this was a simple insecticide question, the patient would have to meiosis, would have to have uh, meiosis, right? Because we have too much parasympathetic stimulation, therefore the eye constricts. Now, the trick with this question is that, and that I don't like the way this question is written because it just goes too far to trick you, is that this guy is a farmer, right? He's had insecticide poisoning. Someone gave him atropine and he overdosed on atropine. And so you're seeing atropine overdose, not insecticide overdose. But the question fails to mention about anything about that, right? It basically is trying to trick you by giving you a scenario you're familiar with, but then changing it a little bit, right? So what happens? So this guy has the way it works. You have atropine, right? What does atropine do? Atropine blocks parasympathetic, so blocks muscarinic. So you have less parasympathetic. So you're basically all these symptoms you're seeing are low parasympathetic, low like muscarinic, like when you have low acetylcholine symptoms, right? And but my drysis is a real clear one that because it's the opposite way, and I always go with that. So when you have atropine overdose, you give them physostigmine, right? Remember, we have physostigmine, prednistigmine, and neostigmine. Prednistigmine and neostigmine are used for treatment for myasthenia gravis. The only use physostigmine has is for atropine overdose. Also, remember that physostigmine is a is has higher CNS permeability, so physostigmine goes into the CNS. I think, I don't know. But the reason one of them is different than the others is because of its CNS permeability. Uh, let's look at the other choices. Acetylcholine. I mean, theoretically, you have low acetylcholine, it would help, but practically no, because this is acetylcholine in the veins or vessels. We need acetylcholine in the synapses. Atropine. The patient has atropine. So this is a lot of what a lot of you went for, but it's wrong. Malathion is the toxin, the herbicide, the insecticides. Epinephrine is just not your answer here. 6. Yeah, I'm actually proud of myself for not falling for that. 7. 2 nights previous, 25-year-old woke up in the middle of the night with tachycardia, high blood pressure, and headache and severe sweating. Elevated VMA in her urine. Now, VMA is vanillyl mandelic acid, something like that, right? And it's a byproduct of norepinephrine and epinephrine metabolism, right? So this patient has, as you should know by now, pheochromocytoma. Uh, let's talk about what you shouldn't give this patient, right? Which is propranolol, right? So it's an important idea. This will show up a lot. 2 cases: one, cocaine; two, pheochromocytoma, right? You don't give them beta blockers because these guys, these vessels, are under heavy alpha 1 stimulation bombardment. They have a little bit of beta 2 bombardment, like stimulation, right? Because of all the epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, this beta 2, remember, beta 2 is a CAMP. CAMP relaxes vessels. That little bit of beta 2 is what keeps them living, basically. If you give them a beta blocker, thinking you're going to slow their heart down, thinking you're going to fix their blood pressure, what happens is that they lose that little bit of beta 2 signaling that's keeping the vessels a little bit open. So their vessels completely collapse and they go into a crisis, right? So when you have a cocaine or a pheochromocytoma patient, what you don't give them, and this will be a question way more than what you do give them, will, is beta blockers. You don't give them beta blockers. It's an easy thing to fall for because beta blockers has so many uses, and you'd be tempted to give them some beta blockers, but don't. So you don't give them beta blockers. You give them phenethylamine, right? Remember, there's phenethylamine and the other one, phenoxybenzamine. I think phenoxybenzamine is irreversible. Uh, Phenoxybenzamine, you give them intraoperatively, something like that. Phenethylamine, you give them previous to the operation. And the reason you do give them the drug during the operation is because when you're removing that massive tumor, uh, it has a lot of acetylcholine or whatever. Not acetylcholine. It has a lot of epinephrine, norepinephrine, and when you're physically removing it, some of it gets released, and you have to stabilize the patient. That's why I think you give them phenoxybenzamine because you don't know how much of it is going to get released to block everything that's going to get released. And then um, after the operation, you probably, I don't know, after the operation, they're fine. You don't need to give them anything. At least not these two. C. Yeah. So important point about that question is what not to choose, because a lot of times it will tell you what you not give her, what's counterindicated. With that and cocaine, you'll see it in cocaine a lot. Okay, this will be the last question we're going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to try to finish it and finish at least into question 10, which we'll get our first set of renal questions. All right, an experimental assessment of. I just want to know what this line represents. Is it okay? So it's blood pressure, and it's mean blood pressure, right? So again, drug X increases, drug Y doesn't do anything on its own, but then um, drug X, if it's given after drug Y, it decreases. So what I'm thinking is that drug X is something with alpha and beta two, alpha one and beta two characteristics, and then drug Y is blocking the alpha part. So when you give him drug X after, only the part works and you get a decrease, right? So let's look for something like that. And if it wasn't, and if we couldn't find something like that, then we'll go choice by choice and see what fits and what doesn't. All right, so drug Y has to be something that blocks alpha signaling. Phenoxybenzamine fits. Uh, Propranolol, no. These are beta blockers. This guy fit again. So drug X has to be something that has alpha 1 and beta 2 signaling. We got epinephrine versus phenylephrine. I don't think phenylephrine doesn't have beta signaling. Phenylephrine is famously just alpha signaling. Epinephrine is our answer. So 8A. Short and concise explanation. Also remember epinephrine is dose dependent. So at a low dose, it mainly stimulates the beta 2 receptors, but at a well, I guess high dose, it does the alpha 1. But when we're talking about like giving it to a patient in an EpiPen or something like that, you're almost always talking about the high dose. All right, so next question tells us 25-year-old 25-year-old woman. Again, I just see the high blood pressure. I know it's going to be a pheochromocytoma question. or maybe not actually. No, cocaine. Oh my god, exact question I was just talking about. What do you not give to a patient that's having a cocaine overdose? Remember, the problem is the beta 2 receptors, right? That are giving somewhat of vasodilative signal to our vessels. And if we block them by something like a propranolol, we're going to kill our patient. So that's why the answer here is propranolol and not atenolol. Remember, atenolol is a beta 1 blocker. The way to remember that is any for beta blockers, if it's from A to M, if it starts from A to M, it's beta 1 specific. If it's N to Z, it's alpha, sorry, it's beta 1 and beta 2, right? So atenolol is not the answer here, but it would be really, really dumb to still give a patient who is having a cocaine overdose atenolol, because atenolol, when we say this beta 1, it's not purely beta 1, it's like 20 to 1 beta 1 to beta 2. You know what I'm saying? So it's way more beta 1 than beta 2, but that's still that one part. It's enough to cause the patient trouble. So we just don't stay away from beta blockers when you have a patient with cocaine overdose. Okay, last question for part two. Doing an investigation. Okay, let's look at the graphs. Uh, Vasoconstriction is here, right? And got so we give him norepinephrine, right? And then we got XYZ. Give him norepinephrine, and the normal patient responds like this. With increased dose of norepinephrine, you get like higher doses, and like average, we say is here. So drug X will make norepinephrine way more potent, right? Because at a lower dose, you can expect a higher response, right? So that should be something like, I don't know. Our choices are, let's look at, so the first one is always X. Cocaine works, right? Phenoxybenzamine is a blocker of the alphas, right? So this doesn't work. This is like the opposite of the effects we're having. Prazosin, same story. Propranolol, there's no reason for it to potentiate norepinephrine, but cocaine does, because cocaine releases more norepinephrine, so it's like you get the response faster. And then we got Y and Z. So basically, we gotta be like between. So what's okay? X Y. Let's. So this one is gonna be Y, right? Oh, prazosin. Okay, good thing we already know that has to be phenoxybenzamine, right? And so phenoxybenzamine is an irreversible blocker. That's why the peak isn't as high in Z. It just like blocks some of it, so you're not able to put as high of vasoconstriction because some of the receptors are blocked. And so you gotta think of prazosin versus propranolol. Propranolol will increase. So propranolol is a beta blocker. Beta 2 is significant here. It will block beta 2, which increases vascular tone, right? So if anything, propranolol should push it this way because it should increase vasoconstriction at a lower dose, right? But prazosin is an alpha 1 blocker, right? So it does move everything to the right because you need a higher dose of epinephrine to have the same vasoconstrictive effect. So when you give charts like this, really do go through like X and Y axis and understand what they're talking about. And usually you the way you think of it, you think of movement in the X axis, and then you think what effect does it have. So here you see this point help move to the left, right? So it means at a lower dose of epinephrine, you get the same level of contraction. So X is something that potentiates, something that strengthens. This way, if at a higher dose of epinephrine, you get the same response. So Y is something that makes it worse. So my answer is A for this one. Right. Okay. I'm gonna pause this part. How do I pause it? I hope it was a good video. Catch me in part 3. And like this video, please.